All right, now we can begin, and I can officially welcome all of you in the lobby and all of you on Zoom to the first night of our New Wars, Old Questions, Military Technology and Jewish Teachings in the 21st Century, Scientists in Synagogues program, right? It rolls up. Oh, you can clap, yeah. First, I want to say a big thank you to the Sinai and Synapses organization. Their Scientists in Synagogue grant program made this series possible, and we really appreciate their funding partnership and also their thought partnership in putting this together. It's maybe like an interesting topic for us to pick if we're going to talk about science and religion. I feel like you could think of a lot of things to discuss, and military technologies and science related to those things maybe does not come to the top of your list. But we thought it was maybe an interesting opportunity to take advantage of our positioning and the work of, it turns out, lots of our members and lots of other people who live in this area to really do some learning on a really interesting and not so simple topic, right? So before we turn things over to our scientists of the evening, I want to offer us just sort of two Jewish texts that we might hold as we move through this series, right? I'll say first, same thing I said if you came to our Shabbat Lunch and Learn, which was meant to sort of prime your palate for this. If you were hoping to walk away with a clear answer on what Judaism says on like what to do with all these things, I'm gonna just disappoint you right now, and you can work through those feelings for the rest of the class, right? Really what we're doing is sort of trying to open up some of our texts and the values of our tradition and hold them in conversation with the science and the technologies that we'll be learning about, right? So first, there we go, okay? Famous quote you're probably familiar with, said by the prophet, namesake of our congregation. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war, right? We are a people who yearns for peace. We pray for it all the time, right? Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amecha, Oseh Shalom b'Momav, Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, right? We want peace. This is the hope for the future, right? This is the vision that our tradition holds. And yet, oh, we're not going to talk about that tonight, right? Torah stated principle. If someone comes to kill you, rise and kill him first, right? This comes from Sanhedrin, a rabbinic text many years later than the Torah, but early, like 200 to 500 CE, right? A long, strong sense that this is the world that we are in now. And sometimes it is dangerous. And if danger approaches you, you have a responsibility, an obligation to do something. Turn it over. All right. Gary Heiligman, everybody.
Okay, good evening. I'm the lay member of the team that's running this with Rachel, and I'm very pleased this evening to introduce Dr. Zachary Epstein. Dr. Epstein received his PhD in laser physics from the University of Maryland. 3 years ago, and has joined the Applied Physics Laboratory, where he is a senior professional staff who works with lasers in the military context on a daily basis. And so it's with great pleasure that I welcome him to talk about lasers, jammers, and 21st century technology and its relation to Judaism. Dr. Epstein.
So thank you to Rachel and to Gary and everyone who came here today, and the organization Sinai and Synapses for helping to organize this as well. And it's really a merit to be here in this lobby with everyone that on a busy weeknight, a cold weeknight as well, came all the way out here to to learn Torah and to learn science. And it's a very holy group, so I feel very fortunate to be here. So this is I guess I'm supposed to be here. So there's a quotation here. Identify the source of this quote. We have a little trivia today. From this entity, which was like a tiny mirror point, void of any matter, came forth everything in the entire world. So does anyone know, is this the Big Crunch? Is it the Big Bang, the Big Short, or the Big Freeze?
Big Bang.
Good.
Go with Big Bang.
So the consensus seems to be the Big Bang. So actually, this is from a classic commentary on the Torah by Nachmanides. This is by the Ramban the Nachmanides from the 13th century, a famous, well-known rabbi. So the question is, from where did the Ramban know this? Was it perhaps the society around him? So as it turns out, what society believed from all the way in the BCE until really the 20th century, everybody believed in temporal infinitism, which means that the way that the world is and the universe is the way that it always was. If you go back in time, you would see exactly what you see today, and as you continue to move forward in time, you would also continue to see a stable universe exactly the way it was. And it turns out that people very much thought lowly of the Jews for this reason, for the Jews believing that the world came from a point, that the world had a beginning. We look around, we don't see that there seems to be a beginning in the world. Things seem very consistent. And so we received the Torah at Mount Sinai. And Sinai is the same word as sina, as hatred. So the sages say that it's going to be the case throughout all of history that there should be an inexplicable hatred of the Jews in the world. Thank you for the microphone. That there should be an inexplicable hatred in the world for the Jewish people. And we saw it in the 1800s, we saw it in the 1900s, we saw it in the 2000s, even today. So these sages sure were right. And also in the time of the Ramban, people thought that it was crazy of him to say such a thing. And another question we'll ask is, from where does the Ramban know this? If you would read the Torah, just word for word, in the beginning, if we would try to translate, in the beginning, God created, or in the beginning of God's creating of the heavens and the earth. So it doesn't say anything about a point. So where did he get this? If you and I were back in that day, in the 13th century, if we were going to write a commentary on the Torah, and we were going to write comments about the Torah, we wouldn't think to say such a thing. So the question is, where did he get this? And so the answer is that we say commentary in English. We mean a person has our own thoughts and ideas, and we put comments on top of something. But the Hebrew word for commentary is perush, which means to take something and to open it up and to reveal what's inside. So the Ramban, because he had such a deep knowledge of Torah, was able to look at the beginning of Bereshis and to come to this conclusion of the Big Bang. And so before I speak, so it says, let there be light in the Torah. So I'm a physicist in nonlinear optics and in laser physics. So light is something I think very much about, perhaps too much. The Torah says, let there be light. The question is, what is light? When the Torah says, let there be light, what does it mean? Is it just light, photons? And so this is going to have multiple layers, and I'll explain why. Is that in the Torah, there have to be many layers. We learn two things about it. One is that the Torah comes from an infinite creator, and it's supposed to enable us to live a life that is going to be godly and resemblant of the creator. And so if we're going to resemble an infinite being with something such as the Torah, so it ought to be fairly deep, to have some sort of infinitude within it. And secondly, we learn that when we learn Torah, we're connecting with, so to say, the mind of Hashem. Our mind connects to a greater wisdom. And so therefore, if it's reflective of the mind of Hashem, it should be very deep. So King David, regarding the Torah and regarding Hashem, says, O Lord, your thoughts are very deep. So the question is, we look around society, and some people see that the Torah is something very deep, and some people feel that it's trivial or superfluous. There seems to be a wide range of different opinions on the matter. And so you'll find a trend when you approach this matter, and it's a verifiable trend. It's a trend referred to in Devarim, all the way back, it was predicted. It says, for the Torah is not an empty thing from you. It is your life. And the Midrash says regarding this, for it is not a trifling thing. And if it seems trifling, this is from you, meaning that the emptiness comes from within the person. We find this very interesting trend in our personal lives and also in our interactions with others, that when a person hasn't learned very much about Torah, so it seems very simple and nice messages from sweet people. And the more a person learns, I find, and we find if we would consult Rabbi Rachel and others, that the more a person learns, the more a person realizes how deep and layered the Torah truly is and how much there is to learn about the Torah. So this is an image of the young double slit experiment. I'm going to speak a little bit about what is light. So when we think about light, you have some lamps up here. So what's happening when the light comes into our eyes? So it seems to be that it sends out photons. It sends out little light particles, and they go to our eyes, and our eyes send signals to our brain, and our brain processes it, and we realize that it's bright and it's light. But light is not only a particle. The young double slit experiment was the first experiment that really showed that light is a wave and there's particle wave duality. So he took a flashlight and covered it with a light filter just so that you have only one color. And he sent this light through two slits, through a board that had two slits in it. So you would think, well, what comes out on the other side? There's going to be light from one slit and light from the other slit. But that's not what he saw. He saw that on the other side, in the middle, between where the two slits were, there was a bright streak. And he found that as you go further out, it gets dark. And then as you go further out, on both sides, it gets bright again. You go further out and it gets dark. You go further out and it gets bright again. It's very strange, very interesting. And that's because light is a wave. So if you have this sinusoidal wave, this is the electric field as a function of time or of space. This is a way to represent light. And so if the peaks of the top of the blue wave are aligned with the peaks of the yellow wave, so then we see that they add constructively. It's taking one and adding it, and you get two. So you get a larger wave and you get a lot of light. You get a bright spot. But if the direction is such that the blue, the peaks of the blue are located at the troughs of the yellow, so it's like 1 plus minus 1 equals 0, and you get nothing. You get a dark place. And so this is what's happening due to what they call superposition, which was a property of waves. Now, if you would reduce the energy in the light, in the flashlight, or you would put a bunch of filters just to make it really, really not very bright. So what you would find is that every once in a while, in comes a photon, pop, it goes through a slit, and then it shows up in one location, in one point on the detector. And then pretty soon another photon comes through, and pop, it shows up on another point in the detector. So very clearly, light is a particle. And if you would allow this process to continue and you would record where every photon is hitting on the detector, so slowly, if you put all that together, you would see something similar to these, the bright spot in the middle, the bright spots on the outside. Those are the locations where each individual photon is going to. So somehow it seems to be a particle and a wave. Now, physicists do not like that very much. Jews love it, actually. So we say, or ha-Torah. So what is light? We have this phrase, or ha-Torah, which means the light of Torah. So why does King Solomon, he says this in Proverbs, say that the Torah is light? So the simple analogy is that we live in a world that's full of darkness. There's so many challenging things occurring in the world, so many problems in the world. We can try to learn from animals to find light in the darkness, but sometimes animals behave altruistically, and sometimes they eat one another alive. There are so many perspectives and ideologies, systems of values, definitions of what is good and what is bad. And there's no instruction guide to illuminate for us what's important and how to live our lives if we would just look at nature, unless we were perhaps very discerning. Until the Torah, which lights up the darkness and shines a path for us. It shines a path of righteousness and of truth, and it has changed the entire world and continues to change the world. So in the eyes of King Solomon, this was why the Torah was light, and his words continue to be so relevant today. And so now that we've spoken a little bit about light and a little bit about the Torah, and I've described the structure of light, that it's a wave and a particle. So one question would be, well, what is the structure of the Torah? And if light and the Torah are related by King Solomon, So perhaps their structure also corresponds. So in the Torah, the first thing that we have is the written Torah. We think of the Torah, so we think of the 5 books of Moses, you put it into a Torah scroll, and you wrap it up, and that's the Torah. And yet, when you go to a Torah study at synagogue, so after they bring something from Deuteronomy and from Genesis, so then they bring something from the Talmud, and then Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avos, from the Mishnah, and then they bring a Midrash. So we should say to our rabbi, well, we're going home or you're going home, because this isn't the Torah. The Torah is the written Torah. But rather, we find that not only is there the written Torah, but in addition, there's the oral Torah, which enables us to understand what is written within the written Torah. And so while the structure of the written Torah is very finite, just like a point, it's very definite. We can point to a Torah scroll and say, there it is, and they're all the same. So similarly, when we compare, when we consider the oral Torah, which has all of these different opinions and deep, lively discussions that still happen today, in all of the study halls, 2 students studying together and passionately, even when class doesn't require it, debating and discussing. So there's very many truths and many perspectives within it. And so first we would say, well, this is very much like a wave. A wave has superposition. It's the superposition of many truths. But we might have a problem to think, well, how could it be that there's different opinions within the oral Torah? When we look out at the world, there's a certain truth, and that's the truth. So it's very much like a diamond. If we would look at a diamond from one angle, we would say, this is what the diamond looks like. But another person would look at the diamond from another angle, and he would say, no, it looks like this, because it's the finitude of our minds. But really, the diamond is a diamond. There's different ways to look at it, and it all is the diamond. So too with the Torah, all of these different perspectives come together to create the truth in a superposition. And so too by light, all of these different waves add together and create what we observe as light. And just a final point regarding this is that it's not only that the structure is related in such a way, but the issue that physicists really have is we want light to be a particle, and ultimately it turns out that it's a wave. We want light to be a wave, and it turns out that it's a particle. So we find in the Gemara in Shabbos, in the Talmud in Tractate Shabbos, that there was a potential convert, and he went to Shammai, and he said, I want the written Torah, but I do not want the oral Torah, will you convert me? He said, I want light to be a point, but I don't want it to be a wave. And Beis Shammai sent him out. He said, that's not the way the Torah works, and that's not the way light works. So he went to Beis Hillel, and he said, I want to learn the written Torah, and I want to convert, but I don't want the oral Torah. So Beis Hillel said, here, come, sit down and learn. This was the greatness this was the greatest scholar in all of Israel, in addition to Beis Shammai, and he sat down with the convert to learn the Aleph base. So they sit, and he teaches him an Aleph and says, this is an Aleph. He teaches him a base and says, this is a base, a bet. And he says, come back next week, we'll continue. So the potential convert comes back in the next week. Beis Hillel points him to a shin and says, this is a taf, and says, this is an Aleph. He points him to a shin and says, this is a base. And so the convert is very confused. He says, no, but last week you taught me that this was an Aleph and this was a bet. And he explains that without the oral Torah, if all we have was the writing in the Torah, we don't know anything. We don't even know what a letter is. So he says you cannot have the written Torah without the oral Torah. You want light to be only a particle, but really it's also a wave. And similarly, we have 2 halachos, 2 Jewish laws that illuminate this as well. So the oral Torah, it's not supposed to be written down. When you write something down, it becomes very defined and finite. And so for many years, it was entirely oral and spoken for 1,000 years. And then comes the destruction of the Second Temple. And it was acknowledged that if we would not write something down, we would lose the whole Torah. We were being dispersed to all of the different nations, to where we are today. And so what they did was they wrote it very tersely into the Talmud, but not so, into the Mishnah, but not so much because it's not supposed to be written. And later on, they realized that that was insufficient and wrote it in a little more, still very terse, but a little more into the Talmud. And that's what we discuss it very often today. And the reason that it can't be written into a book, the oral law, there's a Jewish law that it has to be oral, is because people want for light to be a particle, but no, really, it's a wave. And similarly, when it comes to the written Torah, when we have the written Torah, we would think, well, maybe we'll make it oral. Maybe we'll speak it by memory. It turns out that there is a Jewish law which tells us that with the exception of certain things like Kriyas Shema, the reading of the Shema, a person's not allowed to recite the Torah by heart. You have to have the physical written Torah there. So if on the other side you want for light to always be a wave, so you can't. It has to also be a particle. So the structure is very similar in this way. And just to mention, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, the words of the Talmud, which say that Beis Hillel has his opinions and Beis Shammai has his opinions. They apply the same oral Torah, but they get different results when they apply it to the written Torah. They come to different conclusions. And we say that both of these are the words of the living and eternal God. And this is the principle of superposition. This is occurring in the oral law, and it's no coincidence. This is so that's these are some of the parallels. So the question now is, why do physical light in the Torah, which is referred to as light, why do they bear so many parallels? Some of which include modern scientific theories, like particle and wave duality, which the sages of old were not involved with. And similarly, the Ramban, where did he get what he got? So Chazal teach us, and when I say Chazal, it's translated to the sages, and in English it would mean our wise ones of blessed memory. But when we talk about this sages, we think like cute old men, or like the course in ancient philosophy in college. It's very difficult to relate. But here's what the sages say about the sages. So Rabban Gamliel in Brachos calls the sages Balei Teresim, which means shield bearers. So Rashi explains, who has a famous commentary on the Talmud and on the Torah. He's an unbelievable scholar. He explains that Torah scholars are called shield bearers because when they argue and dispute in the Beis Medrash, in the study hall, they battle each other in Torah like warriors wielding shields. This is something very rigorous and something that's really a war. It's something that people fight about very strongly because what we want is to get to the truth. And similarly, it's written in Ethics of the Fathers in Pirkei Avos that Rabbi Eliezer said, "Warm yourself by the fire of the sages, but beware of their embers, lest you be burnt. For their bite is the bite of a fox, their sting is the sting of a scorpion, their hiss is the hiss of a serpent, and all their words are like fiery coals." So these are the sages when we say Chazal. They say that God looked into the Torah and created the world. So the Torah is saying in the Midrash is that it's not only a book of wisdom, but rather it's the code, the blueprint from which the world was created. So it's like the blueprint of a house. If we look at the blueprint of the house, we might not know exactly what it is, and we might be able to have different interpretations as far as how do we understand this. Does this translate to a door? So now we look at every blueprint and we're going to say that this is the door, or maybe it's a window. So there's a code. There's multiple ways to define how to translate a code into reality. So the written Torah, we understand, is the blueprint or the code for creation. It's not a separate thing or a book of wisdom, but creation itself is within the Torah. And the oral Torah, then, contains a set of rigorous tools to decipher the written Torah. So in Rabbinic Judaism, we have the oral Torah, and you'll know that because I can show that really the Torah is such a code, because the Torah is a code of such a way, and it's so terse, so one may invent divergent interpretations. And this happens throughout Jewish history, and these interpretations often lead to a lack of Jewish cohesion. And so the first time we see this was in the case of Korach and his followers. So he challenged Moshe himself. He said, "Moshe, your interpretation of the written Torah is improper. Here's my interpretation." And he and his followers, they ended up falling into a pit in the earth, died a very natural death. And so we would think he was well-intentioned, but the sages teach us that really he had an alternative motivation. It was that he wanted to be accepted into the ranks of leadership. It's a lesson for us all when we want to have different positions and situations of leadership to really think about, is it that we're going to do the best job being a leader, or do we want the honor of being a leader in certain ways? And then there were the Sadducees. Very similarly, this was influenced by the Greeks. In ancient Israel, the Sadducees felt that the Greeks had a superior culture and they wanted to be like the Greeks. They wanted acceptance. There was a procedure where they would take the bris and they would do a surgery on it in order to stretch the skin so that when they would run with the Greeks in doing athletics, the Greeks wouldn't know that they were Jews and they wouldn't know that they were circumcised. So this was how much they wanted to be Greek. And so therefore, they were susceptible to these alternative interpretations. So they became the Sadducees. And they split off and created a tremendous division within the Jewish people that's spoken about throughout the Talmud. And the Qurayim in the 9th and 10th century, in the Islamic Caliphate, they were very much influenced by the golden age of that culture. And so they also were susceptible and they took their own interpretation. And now, they split off and there's a lot of division and difficult feelings hurt. And ultimately, there's very few left. And in Germany, in the 20th century, many Jews were among the secular biblical critics. And when we read, any German Jew from the 20th century, besides maybe one or two that we've heard of, if we would see their writings, interestingly, we would see that the way that they described the Jewish people, they spoke with the identical anti-Semitism as Jews, as the German society surrounding them, specifically in the 20th century. It was a very particular type of anti-Semitism. And similarly, the Christians, they were also influenced by the Greeks, the early Christians. And so they too were susceptible to, be connected with Yehoshua ben Prachia's failed student, and they followed after him, and they separated totally from the Jewish people and became Christians. So what we find in Korach, we see that somehow this propagates throughout all of history. And this is because the Torah is not only a book of stories, it tells us the precedent and sets the precedent. It's a predecessor for everything that comes forth. So when we look in the Torah and we learn from the Torah, we can now understand everything and see the patterns that happen within society and to know how to act in the future. And so now that we've said that the physical world is, first, one of the challenges with alternative interpretations like this is science. So the Christians had a very particular interpretation. And within that interpretation, it said that that all of the planets and the sun revolve around the earth. So everyone's familiar with Copernicus and Galileo, that the church persecuted for science. And this very much leads to this conception that science and the Torah are incompatible. Science and religion are incompatible. And indeed, the early Christians, in the church, they were incompatible. But the oral Torah, fortunately, is compatible with science. So I'll give you an example. We read, in the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the earth. Ara Hashemayim v'sa'aretz. So some of these, different interpretations would want to say it means in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, or the sky and the earth. Well, see, the only problem is that on the second day, God created light. And we know today in science that light came before the earth came. So fortunately, as Jews, we understand that first, God creating, some say it's in God's creating the heaven and earth. But even regardless of this, what is the heavens, Shemayim? Does this mean the sky? So if we look at the word Shemayim, we understand that it's a combination of Eish and Mayim, a combination of the word fire and water. And what we learn from that is that it means the spiritual world, because in this world, fire and water don't mix. If you take fire and you take water, so the fire is going to steam up the water and it's going to evaporate and disappear. And if you would take water and put it on a fire, so you extinguish the fire. So therefore, in this physical world, Eish and Mayim do not exist. So therefore, Shemayim, we understand in the oral Torah to mean the heavens, the spiritual world, not the sky, the spiritual world. And so then the Aretz would be the physical universe. And indeed, we know it's not the earth, because several days later we have the earth. But, so what we see here is that the physical world is encoded within the Torah such that everything physical is a manifestation of something spiritual. And I'll give a couple examples because it's a very abstract concept. So take non-kosher animals. There's a common misconception that pig is not kosher because it has bacteria. And a person would eat pig and get sick back in the day. Whereas today, we can cook it, so it's no problem, totally kosher. So this concept, we can think of why people would like this concept, but it happens to be that the Torah doesn't say such a thing. It says that non-kosher animals are non-kosher, pigs and shellfish, because the Torah says they're not kosher. And it says that these things are spiritually damaging, for a Jew to eat. It says that it's going to affect a Jew's ability to connect with God. And so this is the spiritual reality that the Torah says. So when it manifests itself into the physical world, it's not a coincidence that we see that pigs have bacteria, and we see that shellfish have bacteria, and that physically, that something that might be spiritually unhealthy manifests itself in a way where the physical reality reflects the spiritual reality. And so too, physical light, we have light. We know what light is, but it's merely a manifestation of something spiritual. The Torah and more, which I'll share in the slide or two. So I'm not going to speak about this slide so much, but we're talking about layers in the Torah, and this is going to be relevant in the next couple slides. We have the pshat, the simplest layer, the surface layer of the Torah. To read it, word by word, just to understand what the words mean and what the Torah is talking about. The second layer that our tradition speaks of is remez, which is like a hint. And one layer deeper, we have drush, contextual and non-contextual, moral and philosophical explanations, and halachic discourses. And the fourth level is sod, Kabbalah, the hidden or secret meaning. So Jewish physicists observe striking parallels between the hidden part of the Torah and the hidden part of the physical world. In other words, the science. Many of them write beautifully on these topics, among them Andy Goldfinger here in Maryland, Yosef Sabag, Gerald Schroeder, Chaim Presby, Aaron Shriver, Avi Rabinowitz, Yehuda Levi, and Harold Gans. These are just a few. So there's something going on. That Kabbalah and the Torah, that science and Torah have such parallels. And the reason is because the physical world came out of the Torah, so they should reflect one another. So now that we're talking about what is light, so first is physical light. So after the creation of Shemayim and Aretz, or at the beginning, so first we have Tohu v'Vohu, says the Torah. We have Tohu, which is complete and utter emptiness. And then we have Vohu, which the Ramban again comes and explains is the four elements of the universe, meaning that we have matter and antimatter, positive charges and negative charges. Similarly, we have the four fundamental forces of the universe, the electromagnetic force, gravity, the strong force and the weak force. And through these forces and these particles come the four types of matter. Because of these physical principles, we have gas, and we have solid, and we have liquid, and we have plasma. And so we understand from the great Baal Shem Tov from the 1700s, he says that the primary goal of a Jew, the greatest goal of the Jewish people and of an individual Jew, is to unify the four letters of Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. We can talk Kabbalistically about what this means. But he says this is the greatest goal of the Torah. And I heard of a friend who had a grandfather, old Moroccan man who everywhere he went, he would mutter something. He'd tie his shoe, he would mutter something. He'd open the bathroom door and he'd mutter something. And his grandson asked him, "What are you saying?" He said, "Shem Yuchad Hashem," for the sake of the unification of the holy name. And this it comes up very often. And interesting, so this is the greatest goal, says the Baal Shem Tov of Judaism. And as it turns out, the greatest goal of science, the greatest goal of all of physics, is to take not the four letters of Hashem's name, but the four physical forces and to unify them into a unified field theory. So interestingly, the greatest goal of Torah, of a Jew, and the greatest goal of science are the same. So Torah is also spiritual light. We learn it in King Solomon's Proverbs. For a mitzvah is the lamp, he says, and the Torah is light. So a mitzvah is a vessel for us to receive and to release light, and the Torah he calls light. Similarly, there's a famous prayer, an ancient prayer recited by the Jewish women for generations and generations, that's recited at the Shabbat candle lighting. And there's beautiful songs if you YouTube Vizakeni. It's a beautiful song. It says, and this is our great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. May I merit to raise children and grandchildren, wise in understanding, who love Hashem, fear God, and speak the truth. May they be holy offspring who cleave to God, and illuminate, who may Irim, or light, and illuminate the world with Torah and with good deeds, and with service to the Creator. So here again, we see this concept of light being Torah. It's throughout the Torah in many different places. And secondly, there's also a higher spiritual light that's referred to when it says, let there be light. Our sages explain there's also a higher spiritual light, which we don't ordinarily have access to, but we actually have access to it on Hanukkah, which is coming up, the darkest time of year, and the darkest places and times in the world. And with Hanukkah, when we light the candles, we're filling the world with light as well. And so Hashem said that the light is good. Light is very good. There's many good things that we can do with light. Not only do we use light to see, but also we can flip little tiny switches with laser light. And in addition to light bulbs, we have lasers, which I'm a little partial, but I think lasers are very good. So what's the difference between laser light and ordinary light? So ordinary light has all the colors. White light has red and blue and green, the whole visible spectrum. In addition, there's many things in the electromagnetic spectrum, gamma rays, radio waves. We see visible light. And laser light is monochromatic. You can get one color, very carefully one color specifically. Similarly, a light bulb, it shines all the way out. And even a flashlight, you shine it at a wall and it spreads very large, whereas laser light is directional. You can point a tiny laser light at the wall very far away. It'll still remain tiny by the time it gets to the other end, which is many applications. And finally, ordinary light is incoherent, meaning that if you know what the light looks like here, and you want to know what the light looks like here, you're unable to know. Whereas laser light is coherent. Once you know what it looks like here, you know what it looks like here, and that has many applications in nonlinear optics. When we try to interact with materials, we can coherently create certain effects. And so let's talk a little bit about how a laser works. Laser is called the light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. I don't remember it either, so that's why I wrote it on the thing. So we have a laser material. This is some sort of medium. It could be a gas. There's many sorts of lasers. And you put in an energy source in addition to some kind of battery power. The main thing you put in is light. You take light that's not really laser light. It's not very high power, and you send it into this laser material. What happens within this laser material? So the laser absorbs the light, and then it amplifies its light in this physical material, releasing a focused and structured beam, which can then interact with other materials. Interestingly, at first, the way that you get this light is stimulated emission. So you have a photon that comes into the laser material. And it gets amplified in such a way that what's released is that same sort of light, those same photons, just many more of them. And it's directional. So the final light, it resembles the light that initially came in. So as we'll see now, this is an extremely fitting metaphor for our role in the world. In a sense, we're like a laser. So God illuminates us with the Or HaTorah, the light of Torah. It's like the light source that feeds the laser material. We, as the laser material, allow this light to enter us, and we absorb it, and we internalize the Torah, and we amplify it within the depth of our physical selves, and it changes us. And through this process, we can then give structure to and release light of our own through Torah and through good deeds. And this light resembles the initial light as well, the light from Hashem. And the fact that we too become sources of light, that Hashem shines light into us, and then we shine light. So it's not a coincidence. It's a consequence of this concept that we're formed in the image and likeness of God. Similarly, the Nefesh HaChaim says we have a free will. Scientifically, there's really no good reason to think that we would have such a free will. But we understand that just like Hashem has a free will, He didn't just want to give. We learn Hashem created the world to give. But He wanted to give in a way that allows us to exercise our free will, through which we have acted like God and through which we have a connection to God. And that is the greatest good. That's how God could give the most, by giving us this ability. And so I have a visualization exercise, a sort of meditation. And so I want us to, let's see if I have, here. So I want us to close our eyes for just a moment for a little meditation exercise. So picture yourself as a laser material, as a vessel. And feel the warmth and see the blinding brightness of God filling you with light, of a benevolent creator who created us and created the light solely in order to give to us. Allow the warmth to fill you, become one with it. Make yourself a vessel for the light. Feel that the light is good. Experience that you are loved and that you are a good person, if even or only at your core. Feel that you are here for a purpose. Know that you are understood, that Hashem placed you here because he trusts in your potential. As we say in the morning, great is your faith in us, Hashem. Now, picture your family members, each filled with light, in clean white garments from head to toe. Their faces are glowing with wisdom, and their hands are glowing with action. Rejoice in their glow. Now picture all of the Jews in your community, all filled with light, even the ones whom you feel have wronged you, who you feel are not good Jews. All the Jews in the entire world, picture them together filled with light, all of the Jews of all of history, including those who perished in the Holocaust, all filled with light. Picture members of other nations with different appearances, coming from afar and too being filled with light. Picture all of you together, feel the warmth and see the blinding light. Now clench your fists and with all of your strength, fill the world with that light and picture everyone around you filling the world with that light as well. For a moment, just picture it. Okay, now you may open your eyes. So in a sense, we're a little bit like a laser. And so now I'm going to switch a little bit gears to talking about defense. So at the Applied Physics Lab, I do a lot of different defense work, sometimes with laser work, sometimes with other applications and other technologies. Lasers are also useful for remote detection and many things. And so one of the main applications I'm involved with is missiles, defending ourselves from missiles. It happens to be that around the globe, there are countries that have missiles and are obtaining missiles, and it's becoming very, very difficult for us to defend ourselves as a nation. So what do missiles do? They target high-value assets. And what's the problem is that it's extremely expensive to defend ourselves with counter-missiles. And sometimes the counter-missiles might not even suffice. And laser weapons, we find, are actually necessary. Missiles got us 1 or 2 generations. They've protected America since World War I and World War II. But it turns out that laser weapons seem to be necessary. The VP of Booz Allen says that emerging threats cannot be countered cost-effectively by kinetic means. And they are making directed energy weapons increasingly essential. Directed energy has become an operational necessity. This is from Booz Allen, and Colonel Mark Gunziger of the United States says winning 21st century wars requires directed energy capabilities. So lasers seem to be very important for this missile defense. And so we understand that the whole world was created through the Torah. So we might think in our lives also, when we look at the world, Hashem created a whole world for us to look at and to learn about, to understand things in our life from what we see out in the world. That everything is connected to what we're trying to do, to be godly people. And so one parallel to think about is defense is to ensure a bright future for us and for future generations. So we're very concerned, all of us here, about securing a bright Jewish future for us and for our future generations. And to see if this is, something that something I think about with a son, and if it's something that you're thinking about. Is there anyone in the audience who feels that, either a child or a grandchild, you wish maybe they were a little more Jewishly connected or Jewishly involved in some way? And I see many nods. And so hopefully we'll be able to learn something from missiles, which I hope is useful. This is more theoretical. So just to think, what are the things which pose a threat to us and to future generations? Feel free to, you don't need to raise your hand, you can just say, and I'll try to say it in the mic so everybody can hear. The things that pose a threat to us and to future generations.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Are you talking from a global perspective?
From a Jewish, in Judaism, for us to have future Jewish generations. Okay, Adam said intermarriage and conversion. Any other challenges to us and future generations? So secondly, what are our highest value assets? As Jews, what are the things that protect us and are things that are so valuable to us that we would never want for them to be targeted?
Institutions.
Or community institutions.
Our cultural tendency to always question everything.
Ooh, I like that. Our cultural tendency to always question everything. And so now this is just a theoretical, to think which of our investments in the Jewish future, like missiles, are helpful and essential in defense. Missiles are not going anywhere, but maybe can't stand totally by themselves. And so I have a numerical simulation on the next slide, which relates to this point. And first, a brief discussion of certain Jewish motivators, the things that we would fund because it brings us closer to Judaism. So one is cultural things. It's important to fund cultural activities. But one of the challenges that we face is that Jewish culture is wonderful. But also French culture is very interesting and refined, and Chinese culture is fascinating. And so it's very difficult, solely based on cultural elements. So what are, moral elements? Tikkun olam is something that we speak very much about, and it's on the top of all of our minds. So maybe there's a student named Noah who goes off to college. He wrote his college application essay about Tikkun Olam and wrote about his volunteering activities and about all the way he cares about people and different things that matter very much to him and to others around him. So he's on the floor in his college dormitory freshman year with many Indian students. And they go out to lunch one day and they start talking about their values and what matters. So Noah says, to me, I'm a Jew. What matters is Tikkun Olam, to make the world a better place. And everyone nods their head and they very much like it. So he says to Prashant, what matters to you? And he says, I'm not a Jew, I'm a Hindu, or I'm an agnostic, but if it's up to me, the one thing I care the most about is making the world a better place. And we find that it's not only us, everybody really cares deeply. Often the first thing they care about is making the world a better place. So it's one thing to believe in Tikkun Olam, but what we want is for Judaism to make us better at Tikkun Olam. To be such a thing that the Torah and whatever we're doing Jewishly, that's going to make us a better person and more able to successfully do this Tikkun Olam that we value. And that for sure is a keeper. And Israel, it's in 1948, it was very much something that brought the whole Jewish people together. But we see there are many different opinions regarding Israel, especially now. And many students on college campuses struggle because, there's different sentiments, and sometimes they would feel, I wish I didn't even have to think about Israel. Some people would say, or some people would say, I love Israel, but I don't want people to know that I love Israel. And there's so many different feelings and opinions. I can't speak for them, but I think we're all aware that the Israel of 1948, that everyone came together. So it's not so easy now. Israel can bring the Jews close to Judaism. Birthright, different activities, and learning about Israel and supporting Israel. But some, it's challenging. It's and then when it comes to politics, so if we look at policies that are right wing or policies that are left wing, the challenge is that within all of these policies, the reason that they're there is because they all have elements of truth. They all have elements of Torah. They got twisted in a certain way in the society that we live in, and then they try to apply it to different policies. We look at dictatorships. Well, dictatorships actually do have an element of Torah. Democracy has an element of Torah. Communism has an element of Torah. The one who created it was Jewish. And so within Judaism, there's not so much necessarily that we can say specifically about politics in a way where nobody else can say it. And so all of these things together, they're important things to invest in, and they're so important as maintaining our Jewish future. And these are investments which will continue all of these to bring the Jewish people close to Judaism and to secure the next generations. And so what I'm going to show on the next slide is that these days, in my generation, both, no matter what denomination, there's those who identify culturally as Jewish and those who identify religiously as Jewish. This is independent of denomination. And so what I want to show on this next slide in a numerical simulation is we take solely cultural elements. If everybody has religion, but if we were to put aside the religious elements, the capital T truth, and we just take cultural elements. So this is a numerical simulation of the survival of a culture. This is a generic culture. I took certain assumptions that might be relevant. So I make an assumption called the Big Tent assumption, which means that if a person is 70% Jewish or a certain culture by heritage, let's say Chinese, a person is 70% Chinese by heritage. And so in reality, there's about a 70% chance that that person is going to identify in such a way. A Jew who's 70% Jewish by heritage, maybe about a 70% chance he'll identify as Jewish. For the sake of this simulation, I say 100% chance he will identify as Jewish. 50% and up even, I say it's not a 50% chance he'll identify as Jewish. We've done a wonderful job, and we're going to assume it's a 100% chance that this person is going to be Jewish. And so I put together a simulation. I made various generally favorable assumptions. I looked at different global birth rates, if we had two children per mother or 4 children per mother. And so what we see that's very interesting is that the big tent assumption actually does a wonderful job for the first 2 generations. So it makes it so that the population doubles, basically, in the first generation, because you had people who were 100% Jewish or Chinese by their heritage. And then the next generation, they find someone else, and those 2 people have 2 children who are each 50% Jewish by heritage, and because of this big tent assumption, they identify 100% as Jewish. So what we find from these results is that 1 or 2 generations, it's stable, and we actually breeds a false initial confidence. And the instability, just like in defense with missiles, becomes visible after 1 or 2 generations. And so what we find is that funding for cultural activities and opting for an inclusive big tent approach collectively are beneficial but do not impact the exponential decay. So what that motivates is, just like in missile defense, missiles are essential and we're always going to have them, and they're a part of us. So we also need laser light. And so what can we learn about this is that Or HaTorah, the light of Torah, perhaps I would propose the light of Torah is the essential ingredient. And so I'll give an example of a laser. So we are a laser material, say. So in order to release light, so we have to absorb the light first, and we have to absorb a critical amount of light. There's something called the critical, there's a critical capacity that has to be reached for a laser to operate. Similarly, with the kos shel bracha, when we make kiddush on a wine cup, there's a Jewish law that the cup has to be totally empty. If there's already wine in a cup, or if there's water, so it's not good for kiddush according to Jewish sources. And so what people do is they rinse out the cup. And some even have a tradition that even if the cup is totally empty, they still like to rinse out the inside and to rinse out the outside. And that, what it represents is that if we have a cup that's full of wine, and we try to pour wine on it, so the wine's it's not gonna come into the cup, it will just fall onto the white tablecloth. But if a cup is truly empty, so then the wine comes in and it fills us. And so similarly with Torah, it's that one of the challenges when we want to shine the light of Torah is that we live in a society with so many different thoughts and opinions, and every society is different. And inevitably, it becomes a part of us. And so we're full of our own thoughts and preconceptions and notions and what we thought Torah was and how we think we're supposed to live and what the society taught us and our teachers taught us and the politicians taught us and everything. And what we want to do when learning Torah is to empty ourselves out of this wine as a laser material to be able to fully absorb the wine, the Torah, the light. And through that, one can internalize it, and it changes a person. And then we go out into the world, and when we fulfill Tikkun Olam, so now we're different people, we're perfected people, and we have the ability to do all of these things. And now some words of comfort and encouragement. All of us here, we're here because we love Judaism and we love the Torah. All of us. This is enough. Our children, our grandchildren, they see that we value Torah. They know we go to a Torah class. We talk to them and we share a word of Torah. We see a nice article at Aisha, Chabad, or a nice book, and we send it to them. We're talking to them. We say, Torah is really important. Our children, our grandchildren, they know this. And that in itself, we're not in a world where things are just cultural. Because of us, because we're not only cultural. We're here at a presentation of science and Torah. And so I want to offer words of comfort and encouragement that we have exactly what it takes. And God willing, we'll all be very successful in all of our hopes for the Jewish future. And finally here, let me see, does anyone have the time? I just want to make sure I'm not.
You've got time.
Oh, okay, good. So there's only a couple more. So the purpose of defense is to ensure a bright future for us and for future generations. I wrote a little bit of notes here because I'm not so well to say sometimes. So we spoke earlier about using lasers to defeat missiles. So missiles, interestingly, when we try to defeat them, well, one of their capabilities is that sometimes missiles contain jammers. And red jammers, meaning jammers of the enemy, they can overwhelm our sensors, which renders our missiles useless. If we can't sense the object, how are we going to defeat the missile? So jammers, what do? They overwhelm and blind the blue receiver, the United States receiver. And similarly, missiles release decoys in order to prevent tracking. We think that something else is the missile, but actually that's the missile. So similarly, what can we learn about this? Also, decoys, as mentioned, may distract and cause incorrect targeting, is why they're used. So in securing a bright and Jewish future for us and for our generations, to think, which are the things that overwhelm us? Jammers, what are the things that overwhelm us and prevent us from seeing our targets in life? I'm not, you don't need to raise hands if anyone says it. I'll speak into the microphone.
Just the noise of the information overwhelm.
Information overwhelm. Yeah. We live in an unprecedented age.
And you can think of lots of examples: social media, TV.
Social media, TV, many examples.
Misinformation.
Misinformation, very much.
I think one of the basic drivers is just life, basic life processes. Daily life gets in your way.
Daily life gets in our way. And so what you said, it says very similarly in Exodus. It's a little hard to see here. It says, Tichmat havoida al anashim v'yasu al yishu b'divrei shaker. So this is Moshe. Moses is with the Jews in Egypt, and he goes up to Pharaoh, and he says, Pharaoh, we want to go out into the desert and to do service of God. And the Pharaoh says, no. And you know what he says? He says to his people, he comes up with a strategy. He doesn't say, make sure that the Jews don't leave. Here's what he says. He says, increase the burden of work on these people, and then they're not going to be involved with words of falsehood. So I guess the first thing to mention, he calls it words of falsehood. And this is Jewish services he's talking about. And so this is a strategy that nations around us often, when they want to defeat us and to reduce the Jewish influence, when we as Jews pose a threat to the powers that be. So one thing they like to say is that it's sheker, that it's falsehood. And the fascinating thing is that that's the irony, it's the opposite, that Judaism has truth, and those who would try to suppress our voices are the ones with falsehood. And secondly, he says, increase labor upon these people, meaning if people are so distracted, they're so involved in work, everyday life gets in the way. So a person doesn't have time to think. There's so much information. A person doesn't have to process the information. A person's involved in television and internet, as you say, which it can take a lot of a person's time. Maybe there's not even time to think about life, to think about what are our priorities, to think about, when it comes down to it, what really matters, and to tune out voices that tell us what we should value. Voices that tell us that this is what's important and this is what matters. And indeed, it's clearly a good strategy that people have, because we see commercials. People pay the Super Bowl. People pay so much money for commercials. They put images in front of us, and suddenly we feel that this is what we need, and it clearly works. They put so much money into it. And so we're very susceptible to the influences around us. And so therefore, what might be the answer to jammers? In defense, what are the answers to jammers? And so in defense, filters are the preferred strategy of the defense community, both for jammers and for decoys. So if something tries to jam you, it puts a bunch of light into your detector. But if you have a filter to be able to filter out whatever they're sending you in the jammer, or you know what their jammer light looks like and you know what you're supposed to be looking at, you can get rid of the jammer light if it's not too strong. If it's too strong, there's no chance. And similarly, incorrect targeting, you have decoys. But if you have a filter, and you can say, look, I've analyzed this object, and it's not accelerating. It's not the missile. This is the missile. This is what's accelerating. So in defense, filters are the preferred strategy dealing with jammers and with decoys. And so similarly, we learn, this is something that was predicted back in the days of Deuteronomy. Moses says, "Judges and officers you shall place at all the cities of your gates." This is in Shoftim. And so the Siftei Cohen says, and this is brought by the Sfas Emes, he says, "The human body is a city with 7 gates, 7 portals to the outside world, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth. Here too it is incumbent upon us to place internal judges, to discriminate and regulate what should be admitted and what should be kept out, and officers to enforce the judge's decisions. And for every person this means something very different. As Jews, we're not a society that believes in censorship. And at the same time, we're not a society that believes that everything that comes in, we're going to indiscriminately, uncritically consume. And so as Jews, we stand somewhere in the middle. Say there are very few things where maybe we won't be exposed to this. There are certain places that you can't go, you can imagine, but really when it comes down to it is that we as individuals have to be empowered to choose what we want in our lives, what we don't. The people around us, the influences, do people make us feel good or bad? Do they make us better people or worse people? How do we interact with them? What interactions, what activities make us feel better and more connected and more involved in life? And which things make us feel very down? Similarly, the things that we're exposed to, it could be, there's one, say, a television show that makes us feel very good and excited, and we interact well with our family, and we show them the television show. And it could be another one where there's a character who's the main character that we feel attached to, who speaks in a way that's not appropriate for a Jew to speak. And so it can't be that we, for us to watch this character, or maybe a person finds, if I would spend a lot of time watching a character speaking in a certain way, eventually I'm going to start speaking this way. We're human beings. We're very susceptible to influence. And similarly, those who would be involved in, someone might listen to a radio show, and the person speaking is very angry about the matter they're speaking about. And we understand in Judaism that most things we want to be in between. We want to be givers, but we also want to be, careful about not giving too much, to outside of our family. We have to be, active in things, but we also need time to rest. And all the different character traits. We don't want to be too strong. We don't want to be too weak. We have to find the middle ground on all the character traits, as the Rambam. But the one thing he says is when it comes to anger, that's a character trait that a Jew is not supposed to have. And so a person who listens to someone speaking angrily about a certain topic, so a person naturally, when that matter comes up, is going to feel angry about it. Perhaps there's another person who talks about it very well, who's not angry. Things like this, everyone each their own. Everyone has to, we think about in our own lives, what are the things that we can filter out, and what are the things we want, and the things we take in. We can think critically about, the things that we decide we do want to take in also. And so, sort of on that note, I want to turn to my favorite field of nonlinear optics. And here I'm going to share a little bit about what is nonlinear optics, and take a little different turn to say, what can we learn from nonlinear optics? So a CO2 dry laser is what you use in this example, but really the concept of nonlinear optics is you take some sort of laser power, something that changes very quickly in time. So a short pulse laser, you can get a lot of energy in a really short pulse. Or you could take 2 lasers at different frequencies and beat them together in order to create short pulses as well, in a sense. And so you take this light and you pump it into a nonlinear medium. So what's interesting is that every medium really is nonlinear. When you send a light through a prism, say white light, you send it through a prism. So it separates the colors, red to green. But it didn't create new colors. It just, it dispersed the colors into different directions. So that's linear optics. Nonlinear optics is you hit the prism so hard that you cause the electrons to do all kinds of crazy things non-linearly, and they produce different colors of light. And there's all sorts of very interesting nonlinear effects that have many applications in defense and in medicine and in many things in the world. And what's released is, in one application, say if you want to use the laser light for remote detection, or as a laser weapon. So you take the laser light and you focus it down real good in the material in order to have these nonlinear effects at high intensities. And then you spread it out and you send the beam off to a target for remote detection or whatever your application is. So nonlinear optics, it's interesting. It existed all along, but usually we only interact with linear optics. We have to hit a nonlinear medium so hard that we cause these existing properties of the material to manifest themselves. And they always existed, but we just didn't know. We had to hit it with a lot of light. And similarly, this is something that relates to Musar. I don't know if there are Musar classes here. So Musar is a traditional field of Jewish study that became very popular in the 1700s and 1800s, Rav Salanter and others. And the idea is to look at the Torah and to really think about what are our characteristics. We learn certain principles about how we should be. What does a godly person look like in the Torah? And so we analyze ourselves in very careful, very particular ways, and we realize things about ourselves that we didn't even know existed. And it turns out often that these things, excellent. So often these things are manifest in our everyday life and influence, and through Musar, we have the opportunity to learn about these things about ourselves and to change them and to live our lives in a beautiful, godly way. And various ethical questions that come up. These are very complicated halachic questions. Laboratory eye damage, what's the level of risk? Who pays the damage if someone's eyes get damaged in a laser experiment? When you use lasers, there's backscattered light. And also, can you use lasers to blind the enemy? Is that not humane? Lasing down a hijacked plane. What if there's people on the plane? Are they innocent or are they a rodent? Considered someone who's approaching someone to kill them, who a Jew is allowed to kill. And so I want to make sure there's at least a few minutes for some discussions, some questions. I want to make sure we're close to the time. So
Give us a chance to see your summary slide. So.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. So we've spoken a little bit about the depth and the layers of the Torah. We've talked about why that is. We've talked about what is light. For a mitzvah is a lamp, and the Torah is the light. We've spoken about wave-particle duality, how the properties of the Torah and the properties of light in tremendous ways parallel one another in ways that only modern science has discovered. We've looked at the steps of creation and what that means. We've looked at lasers versus ordinary light, a light source absorbing and amplifying and structured beam for interactions which resembles the original source, and found that in a sense, we're like a laser source. We've looked at the role of lasers in Or HaTorah in ensuring a bright future, the light of Torah. We've looked at countermeasures and ethical and moral parallels. We've looked at laser generation of probes and jammers and nonlinear optics and the ethical and moral parallels. And just very briefly, we've mentioned some different halachic questions, which I encourage those who are interested to see what's said about them. Maybe there are discussions here.
No, this was wonderful. Great. Zach, I want to thank you so much. First of all, I'll say I deeply appreciate the plumbing of a metaphor. And I feel like I have a much richer sense of what we can mean when we talk about, right, the light of Torah being a light to the nations. I'm really going to be sitting for a while with this sense of the duality, right, of light and how that speaks to us as a people. And I feel like it's why we're also so good in comedy. We're very comfortable with yes and the multiplicity of possibilities that might exist out in the world.